Welcome to tonight's REDinNYC live stream interview. I am Carly Iacono, First Vice President Investments at Marcus & Millichap, and I am very pleased to be joined by Josephine Saffert, who is the Managing Principal of Olympus Development Group. Welcome, Josephine.
Thank you, Carly.
So before we get started, of course, we need to run through our list of sponsors who, in conjunction with Selman, make these sort of events possible. So let me go through those now. We have Legacy Builders, CNA Seneca Construction, Skyline Scaffolding, DNA Construction Advisors, Champion Elevator, Remax 100, City Bay Capital, Property Shark, Hydrotech Environmental, NYREM View, Real Estate Promos, Clean to Clean, and Eco Safety Consultants. So thank you for everyone who supports this great organization and allows us all to come together for live events like this. All right, let's jump in. So Josephine brings a really unique perspective as an out-of-market developer based in Nashville, Tennessee. Josephine, why don't you tell us a little bit about Olympic Development Group and your history?
Thank you, Carly. Thank you also, Selman Yalcin, for being here today. So I initially actually lived in Manhattan, fully born and raised German, and came to the US as a track athlete initially. And so the university that recruited me is actually here in the South, a little bit north of Nashville. So after college, I moved to Manhattan. And after spending about 1.5 years roughly in Manhattan, I had the opportunity to come and move back to Nashville right when it was growing and booming, rocking and rolling. And it just made sense to start a real estate development investment firm, Olympus Development Group. I grew up in real estate in Germany, actually worked for an architecture office in multifamily. And my father's also involved in real estate development in Switzerland and Germany. And so it just was always around interior design, architecture, and properties. And so, after college, essentially, I was networking in Manhattan more on the venture capitalist side, private equity, angel investors. And so that sort of, really intrigued that investment side. And so Olympus Development Group was founded in 2017. And so there we just started rehabbing properties and then eventually building ground up. So we quite do everything on the residential end. And so it's been just very rapid growth over the last couple of years. Very exciting. And can't wait to just share more about the Southern market here and finding opportunities and what the differences might be to New York City or New York State real estate.
Thank you for that background. It's so easy for any of us to kind of get in a bubble in our specific market. So it's very interesting to kind of hear different perspectives on how coronavirus is affecting different regions, what the cap rates are, what the challenges are. I think there's a lot to be learned by looking at other markets, whether it's from a direct investment perspective. Some of the people listening might be investors themselves, or as professionals in related industries trying to figure out how to strengthen their business and kind of what's working in other places. So Tennessee has been great. We have a lot of clients focused on it in my world, in the net lease world. But why don't you tell me what's happening in that market? What are you seeing, and why should we in the New York area maybe take another look?
So I live in actually Nashville, Tennessee. Olympus Development Group is active in Chattanooga, Clarksville, and Nashville. So it's Middle and East Tennessee. We focus on these three markets just as they're really fast growing. Obviously Memphis, Knoxville as well. Kind of as we're approaching it from an organic growth perspective. I think a strong reason of why Nashville has been growing so much over the years is we do have, so in Clarksville, the second largest U.S. military bases in the world. So it's very much recession-proof on that end. We've had companies as Amazon move here, building their facility, Nashville Yards, as well as Bernstein moving here, building their offices, and just massive growth into the actual cities. So I think what we're seeing, or have been seeing over the last years, probably the last about 10 years. So the first time I actually saw Nashville was 2011. That's really when I came first to the US from Germany. And Nashville didn't look anything like it does today at all. So I think what we've seen is just that it's a urbanization. What sort of is now the, sort of the end result of urban flight, way back in the days after the Second World War. And so we're seeing these cities grow tremendously now as, for example, obviously throughout like the pandemic as well, but even before, as the taxes are quite high, for example, in New York, California, we don't have a state income tax. So we are seeing just a massive flight, into these urban areas as people are more part of the growth. I think New York City is more mature. So Nashville has been just, for example, a place where people are actively building the city.
Are you seeing the growth in the urban cores in the center, or are you seeing the suburban sort of sprawl and shift? Where are you seeing most of the attention?
I think we've seen massive growth really in the core urban centers of, Nashville, Chattanooga, Memphis, Knoxville, Clarksville, just because people didn't necessarily really live downtown in these areas. So they say after the Second World War, people, really moved more out into the suburbs, as it was more common to drive and, have larger houses, larger yards. People essentially fled really the city. And so even now today in Nashville, for example, but Chattanooga, same thing, we still have quite some industrial properties in the actual core center. So here, for example, in Nashville, we have Germantown and Salem Town, which is a little bit more north of the actual like downtown Broadway area. And many of these properties are actually still zoned to this day industrial, just not active, not used. And so obviously developers see the opportunity to redevelop and bring in density.
Do you have a lot of environmental issues that you deal with on your developments because they used to be industrial? I mean, we deal with that all the time in the New York, New Jersey area. Is that an issue?
So I personally have not really run into the issue other than we do have a Marathon Gas company right sort of along the Cumberland River, so a little bit basically of Nashville. And so the interesting factor actually has been, so I've been more hesitant to invest in, right next to these type properties just for the reasons that you just mentioned. But it's not holding back other developers. So we've seen really even residential builders building right next to these properties. So obviously you always have your soil test and seems fine, but we're seeing sort of the turnarounds of these areas more and more. And so we are actually just, I believe, so in the next year, we're getting started on the North River development. So that is essentially a redevelopment of these industrial properties more on the eastern side of the Cumberland River. And so these property developments are obviously vital to the growth of any city, really.
Are you seeing the cost of construction and the cost of building go up because of all the increased demand? Has that changed in the last few years for you?
So probably any developer builder is going to say yes, as lumber has doubled over the last couple months, actually. So kind of to the point a little bit earlier, your question about sort of COVID and, the real estate business has been rocking and rolling really here down in Nashville, or just, in Tennessee in general, so that we've not seen any slowdowns. Really more the opposite, actually. And so with the construction costs obviously increasing, that's been definitely making it tougher to find good deals, right? Especially since we've had such property price increases as well. We just have really low inventory. So that is true on the residential home front, but then even actually lots, really raw land for development. We've seen steep increases of that as more developers from New York, California come to town or come to Tennessee.
Right. So it's great on the resale to have all that demand, but not so much when you're trying to find your own value add project, right? Good and bad. So kind of continuing with what you just mentioned on COVID and how it's affected your business, what are things like in Tennessee? Are you still in a shutdown? Is it kind of life as normal? What's it been like for you the last few months, and how are you guys doing today?
Yeah, that's a very good question. So Broadway is actually still full running with its live music, and we've not really had, much of a slowdown. I think obviously people probably see this vastly different, just depending on what industry they're in. Of course, we've had, a lot of job losses like anybody or any city in the United States. However, I do believe that generally speaking, sort of Tennessee as a whole, Nashville and other areas have been still quite robust, just because we do have restaurants that are open. The mayor essentially just had the phases sort of incrementally being like released. So we had 50% occupancy or capacity, and then 75, and so we're now close to essentially again 100%. And we do have, Nashville's also known to be the biggest bachelorette party town, and so we do have tourism essentially again. Hotels are open, so we have not really seen a drastic drop compared to probably other cities or other states. We did have, for 3 weeks sort of that lockdown, but still at that point, we had curbside pickup, and so it's been
amazing. It's good to hear. Good to hear you're doing so well. Happy.
I can't wait for events to be again in person.
Yes, exactly. We need everything in New York to go back to normal so we can all get together in person. Agreed. Coming soon, hopefully, right?
Yes.
So if someone from out of market wants to consider Tennessee as a new sort of investment horizon, where do they start? Do they call you? Walk me through how someone new to the area should really underwrite this or approach this, and how do they get involved?
They're welcome to call me. Instagram. I obviously there are many different ways to get started. We do have a great group here in Nashville called REN, so Real Estate Investors of Nashville. Phenomenal group to get plugged in, meet phenomenal people, and quite frankly, that was also one of the groups actually that really got me started here. So then we have Urban Land Institute, and just really getting plugged in with them. But I think, it's important to ask people a lot of questions and really understanding what areas are hot. What are the upcoming areas? As we've had obviously massive development now in certain spots. We're still working on the main corridors, for example, of the city. We still have a lot of corridors that are not really developed. And I think it's just really looking for these opportunities where, where there's essentially just an underdevelopment. And I think another way is also opportunity zones. I'm sure that's been a hot topic in Manhattan or New York investors. We do have a lot of opportunity zones across Tennessee, but particularly actually in urban areas, which has been very interesting. I'm sure you've had probably quite some conversations about this as well from really commercial real estate side, but even from a residential real estate investment perspective, we do have zones that are essentially next to Belmont or Vanderbilt private universities that are already being developed. They're not necessarily underdeveloped or, economically negatively impacted. So it's really areas actually that make a lot of sense that would have been or would get developed regardless whether there will be opportunity zones or not, or they will be labeled as opportunity zones or not. And so I think opportunity zone investments or looking for these areas is a great way to get plugged in and find deals, right? And obviously have major just for the capital gain.
Big of a part of your strategy are opportunity zones. It's interesting from my perspective on the net lease side, our investors are kind of neutral on it. We thought it was going to be a really big deal when they came out, and it hasn't been a big driver of our team's business. You on the development side, is that a key factor when you're looking for your next site? How big of an impact does that have on you?
So I actually very much agree with you. So in the very beginning, everybody was very excited about it.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we've done a lot of talks around, you know, Nashville on opportunity zones and written about it. And we do have investments or, you know, have built in opportunity zones or what was labeled or is labeled opportunity zones. However, they were not structured as opportunity zone investments, if that makes sense,
Right.
because
Yeah.
it was just not ready. And I think we do see that quite a bit where it's just not as feasible for
Mm-hmm.
investors to actually implement as one might have thought. I think generally speaking, the idea is great. It's a great concept. And I think those areas have gotten the attention that sort of was intended, you know, to place on those corridors or these specific areas, land tracks. But I don't think that it's been very practical for a lot of people.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why sort of when you ask me on how, you know, how to get started, I think these opportunity zones are a great way to just find these areas where it's up and coming, where, you know, there's really investment also needed, especially since it is so urban focused. It's not just rural at all. But on the other side, you know, to really structure it as opportunity zone investments is definitely difficult. I think the investor and the developer or the investment firm just have to work really closely together to make that one work. And I know you have a lot of experience with 1031 exchanges.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that is obviously a strong vehicle that competes with opportunity zones.
Right.
And everybody's familiar with the 1031, so why not do the same again? So I think there's sort of that just investment vehicle competition.
Right. Interesting. So why don't we switch gears for a minute? I would love to hear more about your perspective individually coming from Germany and having this upbringing that's so different than mine here in the US. How do you look at US real estate differently? How does that impact your view of investments or just business in general? How does that color your perspective?
I think sort of the American dream in the US is definitely still possible. I think I'm kind of living it. And I think, you know, something like, for example, building a real estate development investment firm from scratch would just not be really feasible in Germany and probably just in Europe overall. And from that standpoint, I think it's a great opportunity, you know, to really sort of go where the opportunities truly are. I mean, back in 2016, 17, leaving New York was definitely hard. You know, I'll still love Manhattan, and you know, we'll always go back and forth. But at the end of the day, you know, there was just that opportunity to be part of that growth here in Nashville and in Tennessee. And so I think as an immigrant, that's a massive opportunity. Just because obviously everything is just amplified. You know, the growth has been so aggressive. So from an immigrant perspective, comparing that to Europe, Germany specifically, it's a once in a lifetime opportunity to really see how a city is built, to be part of that urban development. Germany is quite mature, the majority of cities, you know, it's tough to really truly add additional value. And I think even in Manhattan, I mean, it's hard, right? And if so, then it's highly capital intensive. And I think so when you look at areas, you know, here in the state of Tennessee or even Georgia, Alabama, and or even North Carolina, you know, you still have that opportunity to really be part of that urban development. And that's pretty cool.
It's a great answer. I agree. There's a lot of opportunity in the Southeast and some of the less developed markets. Very interesting place to focus. Do you see a lot of foreign investment because of your connections back home or even not related to that? Do you have a lot of people from other countries reaching out to you to invest?
So I do see that. I think, so we do have a really large Korean, Japanese investment front here in Nashville specifically.
Interesting.
So LG actually just came to Clarksville, Tennessee, literally little Clarksville, Tennessee, which is, so for anybody that doesn't know, it's basically right on the border of Kentucky, so very north of here in the state of Tennessee. And so that's where Fort Campbell, the second largest military base is. And so for them, it's apparently also a growth market. They're increasing their footprint there. Yeah, I mean, I think also Indian investors for sure. We see quite a bit. But yeah, for sure. I mean, I think the investment is just coming in from all sides. I mean, I think that the largest impact we just really see from California and New Yorker investors. But of course, I mean, a lot of these investments are done via investment firms, and they source their capital from foreign investors. So it's definitely a wild mix.
I've seen it more difficult on the individual basis. So I think you're right. A lot of it's flowing through these larger firms. It seems harder, for at least my experience, for individuals to buy one specific property, when they're not impossible, but there's more regulations. Have you been able to complete any of those like direct transactions with foreign investors?
It is tough. I think it is tough. Just of what's needed, obviously the tax side. Right. I had last year quite some conversation around that actually in New York with a firm that specializes on sort of making that direct investment happen. I do think it's rather difficult, and I think a lot of times what happens is that still then investors set up sort of an entity here, for example, in the state of Tennessee, and then invest that way. So essentially there's still like sort of a person created or an entity created in that state. So yeah, it's a tough question. Yeah,
I think there needs to be a better vehicle. Maybe it's in the works, who knows? We'll see.
I agree, from a global citizen perspective.
Right, exactly. That's exactly what I meant. Right, correct. So I'd like to dive in just a little more on the personal side, because we have just a few more minutes left. Has COVID changed anything about your business strategy, your personal kind of goals, or how you conduct business throughout your day? It sounds like you've been spared much more than we have in the New York area in terms of, maybe less change, but have there been any takeaways in your overall strategy that you'd like to share?
So I actually kind of want to take one step back, just because, so we've actually been triple hit this year. We've had a massive tornado come through in March, on the night of the 2nd of March. And so that's been pretty tragic. So actually large areas are still very damaged. The overall damage was $1.6 billion worth, of real estate property damage, and 25 people passed. So I think that this year has taught many, many lessons, aside from COVID, but then obviously COVID came right after, which made it even more tragic because so many lost their homes. So I think, looking sort of, or just reflecting on 2020, it's been a massive growth year, I think, for so many, because, everything sort of could change in 1 second, right? From one day to another. What you thought was sort of the status quo just wasn't anymore. And I think, looking at this from a business perspective, from a personal perspective, it's all about being flexible, being really aware that anything could change, and just setting up sort of, any kind of real estate investments also as robust as possible, right? I do think that, the liquidity, cash flow.
Okay. I think we lost Josephine with a connection issue. At least it looks like on my end, but we are almost out of time. So because we're having the last minute connection issues, we will wrap it up now. And I will say thank you to Josephine. If she's able to pop back in, I'm sure she would agree. It was nice swapping ideas. Thank you to everyone who's tuning in from whatever market you might be listening from. We really appreciate your time, and thank you for joining tonight's episode of REDinNYC and our live stream. We look forward to seeing you all again soon.